Hello to you. Doug, what more do we know about this latest bit of information?
Yeah, first of all, the information you just gave has been picked up by a lot of news agencies. It was in a statement issued by the armed wing of Hamas, which is called the Al-Qassam Brigades. They're the militant, the fighting wing, as opposed to the political wing. And what they're basically saying is that, yes, 13, this is according to their own armed brigade, 13 of the hostages, of the estimated up to 150 at least hostages believed to have been taken into Gaza, have been killed and here's where it becomes tricky, in Israeli bombardments of Gaza. So Hamas not saying they killed the hostages. They're saying that the responsibility for these 13 hostages being killed lies on the Israelis because of their bombardment of Gaza. They're saying that 6 of the hostages died in strikes on 2 locations in what's called the northern district of Gaza, the very narrow coastal territory there, which is 40 kilometers long. And 7 others were killed in strikes at 3 locations in the broader Gaza district, which encompasses the capital of the Strip, which is Gaza City, from which those evacuation notices have been given by the Israeli military. So what we're seeing is, the makings of what's going to be a very acrimonious information war beyond the catastrophe of the actual military conflict. We're now going to be back and forth conflicting statements. The Israelis have been saying all along their line, not just in this war, but in past confrontations and clashes with Hamas and other groups in Gaza or in West Bank, but really in Gaza, is that, well, the civilian casualties are almost inevitable because they say Hamas uses civilians as human shields, essentially hiding with them in civilian homes, in homes that are atop tunnels used by Hamas. The problem, obviously, being here is that both sides have a point. The territory is so densely packed, it is almost impossible, a lot of people would argue, to physically separate the two. Hamas would say, no, we do not use humans as shields. The Israelis say we are only targeting military targets, that is Hamas targets. If civilians happen to get in the way, that's not our fault. That's Hamas's fault for taking civilians with them, using them as those shields. But like I said, this is a claim by the armed wing of Hamas. So you have to take it at face value for what it's worth, and you have to take all of the implications of the fact that it's Hamas itself making this claim through its own militant combat units. The Israelis, on the other hand, are presumably, they haven't reacted yet to these claims that 13 hostages have been killed by Israelis. I imagine that there is going to be some blowback from the Israeli side, but you can see the makings of a war where Hamas is trying to deflect any sort of responsibility for blame onto the Israeli military. And that's perhaps the shape of things to come, as if there is a ground invasion coming ahead, we are possibly going to see a lot more of this mutual recrimination back and forth as to where responsibility lies for what could be a feared, very, very high civilian toll as this military operation unfolds.
Yeah, and we heard Israel order 1.1 million Palestinians to evacuate northern Gaza. The UN says that would be a catastrophe. Tell us more about why that is and all the concerns around it.
Well, the UN is basically saying, the people who know it better than I do, because they're on the ground working there logistically, many of them based there for years and years, know up close the humanitarian situation and the living conditions in that extremely densely packed strip. Let me show you a map. Gaza, like I said, is about 10 kilometers wide, about 40 kilometers long, which is about 25 miles from its northern to southern tip. The northern tip of the area is crossing southern at the Rafah crossing into Egypt there. You see in the middle of that map there, it's not color-coded, this whole thing, but there's in red it says Wadi Gaza, and that is the line, the demarcation line between the zone that the Israeli military is ordering people to evacuate from south. So south of that Wadi Gaza line is where the Israeli military is ordering 1.1 million civilian Gazans, almost all of those Gazan civilians, in Gaza City itself, the very densely packed urban center of Gaza. To go south, where they're going to go, we don't know. And that includes UN, aid workers, also locations right now. There are obviously a lot of UN shelters in those zones and schools and shelters. They presumably have to locate south. We've already gotten some reports that the UN, the Refugee Agency, has located one of its offices in Gaza, its office in Gaza, to the south. Whether or not that's in direct response to the evacuation order or just sort of for out of safety considerations to try to be as far from that northern conflict zone as possible. But yes, you're saying the UN is saying that it would turn an already dire humanitarian situation, a disaster, into a calamitous situation. And when I say they physically can't move, just the logistics of getting 1.1 million people to move and flee their homes. Hamas has already responded, saying no, telling the Palestinian people, you're not going anywhere. You have a right to be on your land, in your homes, in your you are not taking orders from the Israeli ministry. So telling the Palestinian people, stay steadfast in your homes, don't go anywhere. And the UN itself has called upon the Israeli military, and this is presumably part of the very tricky negotiations going on right now, to rescind that order, simply because it's logistically impossible, infeasible out of humanitarian concerns. So you can already see, even before this possible, and I have to underline possible, ground invasion, the complications when you have 2.3 million people packed into such a dense territory of trying to reconcile what the Israeli military say are their objectives of ending Hamas as a military operation as we know it, and also safeguarding, as we've been hearing more and more from Western leaders in recent days, the imperative of safeguarding under international humanitarian law the well-being of those civilians who have nothing to do with the military combat.
Meanwhile, a lot of allies to Israel, as well as those of Hamas, are meeting. Defense ministers, foreign ministers are meeting. What can you tell us about the diplomatic efforts?
There's a flurry of diplomatic efforts, obviously right now led by Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, who is on his most extensive Mideast tour since he became U.S. Secretary of State back in early 2021. He is already, yesterday was in Israel. Today he's already met with the Jordanian king, Abdullah II, whose country, Jordan, has a very large Palestinian population. Jordan obviously very much concerned with the status of the Palestinian people and has made comments about how peace can only come to the Mideast if there is a viable two-state solution. He said that in recent days. Blinken also now at this hour meeting with Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, but I must say he has a truncated authority in the sense that he is based in Ramallah in the West Bank. His Fatah faction really only has, and even there, only sort of limited influence. He has absolutely almost zero influence, if any, over Gaza itself, where Hamas has been the governing force in control since 2007, so for 16 years now. So there, Antony Blinken is going to be, because Abbas, in the absence of any other interlocutor, is the go-to man for the Palestinian cause when it comes to American diplomacy. They're going to be talking about how best to restore peace and stability and calm in the region, an uphill challenge, to put it mildly, and with King Abdullah, the same thing. But more importantly, he's going to be moving on to Qatar later in the day. Yes, the same Friday today that we're talking about. And there it's going to be the hostages that we were just talking about front and center. Why? Because Qatar has close ties to the Hamas leadership, even sponsors the political leader, one of its top political leaders in Doha, who's said to have a lavish house there in Doha. Qatar said to, in recent years, provide financing to the actual governing forces in the Gaza among Hamas's leadership. So Qatar is seen as someone who has acted as a hostage negotiator, mediator in the past, a country that can bring its influence, its clout to bear with Hamas once again, because remember, the U.S. can't talk directly to Hamas. So it's an extremely difficult equation, but we do know right now that he actually met with the Palestinian leader in Jordan, because Abbas, the Palestinian leader, has a home, has a residence in Amman, Jordan, in addition to his residence in Ramallah in the West Bank. And then so his meetings with Qatari officials, I think, are going to be based on a lot of deal-making behind-the-scenes deal-making over the hostages. There had been reports that already Qatari officials have been in recent days in contact with Hamas officials about some sort of hostage exchange that would involve releasing dozens of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prisons for how many we don't know, 4 hostages that Hamas has kidnapped into Gaza after its Saturday attack. So we don't know how that's going to play out. We don't know how much influence Qatar will bring to bear, can bring to bear, but it has been effective in the past in trying to mitigate some of these horrific events, including hostage takings of this sort.
All right, Doug. Thank you very much. Douglas Herbert, France 24's international affairs commentator.